Hello there everyone, and welcome to this week's Weapons of Mordhau, the Warhammer. Before we begin, I'd like to give a shout out to Eladon. He has been suggesting this one for a while, so let's get right into it. The Warhammer is a medieval weapon that came into prominent use with the advent of hardened steel plate armor. Armor made of bronze or iron could be penetrated much easier by bladed weapons made of steel than the new steel armors could in the 13th century. To fight against soldiers wielding this armor, a blunt concussive weapon was the best option, considering the difficulty associated with penetrating the steel armor, thus leading to the advent of the Warhammer. The design of the weapon is very simple, consisting of a handle with a heavy hammer-shaped head, often with a spike at the opposite side. Warhammers are among the most diverse weapons in terms of length found during this time period. Many Warhammers were short and meant to be wielded with one hand, like the Warhammer in Mordhau. But many were the same length, or slightly shorter than the person wielding the weapon. For cavalry troops, Warhammers as long as 6 feet or longer have been wielded for use against foot soldiers. The origin of the Warhammer is hard to pinpoint, but it was most likely spawned from the idea of using a typical hammer tool as a weapon, or modifying an existing hammer to be a weapon. Weapons that are similar to the Warhammer, like clubs with stones added to increase their mass, were precursors to this weapon, but generally speaking, weapons like that eventually evolved into things like the mace and morning star, whereas the Warhammer was likely directly derived from the hammer tool. The Warhammer was an extremely popular weapon during the period between the 13th and 16th centuries in Europe, being wielded by most armies in Europe at some point. The design of the Warhammer spread across the globe, and variants were used by forces in India. In Mordhau, the Warhammer is a decent example of the type that you might see in medieval Europe, for use in close quarters combat. It is small, 60 centimeters in length, and extremely powerful. The weapon is also extremely fast for such a powerful weapon, being nearly as fast as the arming sword in most situations. The major differences between these two weapons is that the arming sword is weak versus armored opponents, very strong against nakeds, and much faster in combo attacks than the Warhammer. In its primary stance, the Warhammer is best suited for fighting armored opponents. When aiming for the head, you can easily two-shot an opponent. However, aiming for the head and torso area will generally require about 3 hits to kill an enemy. The swing of this weapon is a bit slow, so accels and drags are nice to add in. The stab of this weapon is much faster than its slashes, and if spammed properly, can really get through an opponent's guard. While weak, its stabs will kill in 5 to 6 hits, and because of its weak nature, some opponents may opt to not block stabs. When this is noted during a fight, you can begin stab morphing into a swing to end the fight rather quickly, especially if you're going to nail headshots. The alternate mode of the Warhammer also has some great utility. As the primary is intended for use against armored opponents, the alternate attack is perfect for nakeds and lightly armored opponents. Furthermore, the speed of the Warhammer is identical in either mode. Well, now that we know a little bit about this weapon, let's rank it. In terms of general utility, the Warhammer has got a lot going for it. The only true drawback to the weapon is its short length. Its primary can beat armor, its secondary attack can beat flesh, and it can be wielded with a shield. Thus, it receives 4.5 out of 5 in terms of general utility. In terms of dueling potential, this weapon also has a lot going for it, just like the arming sword. With a bit of mastery, this weapon will serve you well, 5 out of 5 in terms of dueling effectiveness. The Warhammer's biggest drawbacks comes from instances of fights against multiple opponents, and this is due to its short length. Another major drawback of this weapon is that it stops on hit, unlike swords, and in terms of team play, this can be devastating. Thus it will receive 3.5 out of 5. In terms of visual appeal, the Warhammer is nice, but it doesn't have any fancy skins like them all. However, the cosmetic options complementing this weapon are fairly appealing. The Warhammer will receive 4 out of 5 in terms of visual appeal. That means that the Warhammer receives 17 out of 20 total score. Just as good as the arming sword in many situations, the hammer is bound to please. Well, that's it for this episode, everyone. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe for much more. Go ahead and let me know what weapon you would like to see in next week's episode, and I will catch you all in our next video, which should be about nuclear weapons or movement in Mordhau.